the Godzilla franchise has had a lot of interesting twists and turns, and the Millennium era of this franchise is no different. After Toho killed Godzilla off in the mid 1990s, TriStar rebooted Godzilla, which became a critical failure in 1998. In retaliation, Toho rebooted Godzilla with Godzilla 2000, which started the Millennium franchise, which ended in 2004. Continuity was non-existent in this era, which allowed filmmakers to do whatever they wanted with the character of Godzilla. Sometimes Godzilla was a nuclear creature that was driven exclusively by his rage from his nuclear power and had a pretty traditional history, a pretty traditional lore behind him. Other times he was had a more fantasy driven lore, such as in the 2001 film GMK, where Godzilla was possessed by the spirits from World War II, which gave him a more ominous, more horrific um, demeanor and characterization. But otherwise, the Millennium era kind of did everything and anything it could in rebooting Godzilla's lore, his characterization, his abilities. He could, in Godzilla 2000, we learned he could regenerate himself. He could regenerate his tissue, which I thought was interesting and actually added a little bit to Godzilla's mythos without undoing what we already knew about the character. On the other hand, it was still pretty fun um, seeing a different director have a completely different take on Godzilla. So those were the strengths behind having no continuity. The problem with that lack of continuity is, though, it didn't really allow audiences to get used to any characters, because you knew that in the next movie the characters that you've gotten used to are going to be gone. Their character arc is going to be that much shorter, so you really couldn't get used to anybody. So it just really depended on your preference, whether you were there for the characters or not. If you don't really care, then taking each film in a different direction probably won't be that big of a deal for you. But anyway, moving past the continuity, let's talk about the entertainment value in this. A villainous Godzilla fights a heroic King Ghidorah, which is the first and only time we've seen this in the franchise. We see Godzilla fighting an alien that tries to clone itself by digesting him like a snake. We see Godzilla fighting a trio of his former allies, Angulus, Rodan, and King Caesar. Um, we see the bones of the 1954 Godzilla being used as an exoskeleton, an endoskeleton for Mecha Godzilla. Um, we also, this is all very entertaining, wacky stuff that we don't normally see in this franchise. But what makes that so interesting is it stands in complete contrast to the Heisei era, where all we saw was, or mostly what we saw were more stoic, restrained battles where there was a lot of beam fights and duels. The Godzilla costumes, the monster costumes were a lot bulkier and slower, more deliberate. In this era, we see a lot of more comedic moments. It's fairly reminiscent to previous Godzilla films, particularly in the Showa era. Um, we see punching and kicking and smacking and biting. It reminds you a lot of movies like, you know, King Kong versus Godzilla. Godzilla and Kong toss a boulder back and forth. Godzilla breathes his fire on Kong, and Kong kind of swats at the fire and tries to put his fur out. Uh, Goofy, entertaining stuff. I think that most Godzilla fans have come to know and love. So in a lot of ways, the the Millennium era was a return to form for entertainment value in many respects, but a lot of fans also prefer the 90s era Godzilla, the '80s and '90s era Godzilla, where he was depicted as a more lumbering, stoic creature that, you know, instead of doing drop kicks and punches and doing more humanistic, human-like things, more pro wrestling things, he just, traded blows, breathing fire, firing lasers back and forth at the other monsters. Some people prefer that. It's certainly better than some of the later Showa era movies. You can get goofy and be fun. So it just depends on what you prefer. But anyway, this series also gave us some of the best films of the franchise, according to a lot of fans. GMK is a big fan favorite. It's a good one. The Mechagodzilla duology between Godzilla against Mechagodzilla and Tokyo SOS are also fan favorites. I enjoy those as well. Um, Final Wars is a little more divisive for fans. It's a little too goofy for some, but it has a lot of enjoyable moments like Godzilla fighting the American Godzilla. That's a lot of fun. Godzilla vs. Megaguirus is overlooked by fans, but it's still a pretty good one. Godzilla 2000, though, tends to be my favorite in the franchise. I have a lot of nostalgia towards this film. It's the first Godzilla movie, Japanese Godzilla movie I ever saw in the theater. It was a movie I saw when I was 9 years old with my dad at the Memphis Galleria Mall. Um, a lot of fans consider it only slightly above average, but I think there's a lot to this movie that people ignore. I love the new look, the new dragon-like look to Godzilla. I like the explanation that he can regenerate his tissue, which explains his invincibility. I love the new creature the new villain monster they added in this movie, Orga. I think he's a cool design. So, you know what? You should really check this movie out. And I really think I think this one really stands out. So, Godzilla 2000 is my personal favorite. There's a lot of other films in this series that are really good. The movies that I've mentioned previously are excellent. But I would encourage you guys to check out the Godzilla Millennium era of the franchise. It's a good one. It's certainly not to be overlooked. And try to watch the Showa era and the Heisei era first, just so you get a historical context. When you watch these films, you may gain more appreciation for these films by watching those first, by watching the first two series first. So, anyway, check out the Millennium series and have a good day, guys.